So today, because primarily what we've been working on is budget, I actually asked Representative Butler to join us today. He's the ranking member on budget and kind of give an update of what's been going on, where we are in the process, and where we have to go from here.
All right. Well, our budget committee met with all the departments recently, and we have broken down to separate appropriations committees. We reviewed the entire state budget based on the governor's recommendations, and from our perspective, the governor has made tons of cuts, and they are asking for departments and for social services to tighten their belts. They're asking for education to tighten their belts. They're reducing services to seniors, reducing services to children, and yet they're not asking other departments to tighten their belts. That's simply not true that cuts are affecting the entire state government. They're only affecting parts of the government where the folks need it most. So specifically with Medicaid, we're being asked to go along with cutting Medicaid and creating a system, continue to create a system that is not focusing on primary care and focusing on making sure folks get preventive care, where we're pushing them to the emergency room. And what we believe is that is increasing costs. That's going to continue to increase costs through emergency room visits, increase costs through sometimes senior citizens being put out of their nursing homes. We don't want that. We want to make sure folks get the care up front. It's much cheaper to our system. It's much cheaper to the state, and we're not getting that back from the majority party. More importantly, it's important to note that in economic development and in the administration lines, we're not seeing decreases. In fact, we're seeing increases. They are growing government on their side. They've also implemented a brand new position in the governor's office with the chief operating officer, which they haven't even said exactly how they're going to fund it. There's more secrecy in how they're funding different positions. They still have $300,000 worth of press shop, and they're not making themselves available to the press. We continue to be curious as Democrats as where this money is coming from, how they're spending money, and why they aren't cutting for things that they claim they don't need, yet they're cutting from children and seniors. As we go through the process, we're going to make sure that those folks are taken care of, that children and seniors we're going to restore funding there, and we're going to continue to fight for those folks against the majority party, and I think we're going to be pretty successful on a lot of fronts. Any questions? One last thing. We discussed voter ID funding today in the Appropriations Subcommittee for General Administration. There's been some very confusing portions in the budget of how this is going to be funded, how it's going to be rolled out. Today specifically, there was $1.4 million added for marketing of the new voter ID law. We believe that is still very much not sufficient. Our last Secretary of State predicted that it would be $4.5 million, that would cost $4.5 million to roll out. And let's put that in perspective. We spend $1.5 million, more than what we're spending now, $1.5 million just on promoting unclaimed property in the state. To spend $1.4 million to tell people the new laws for voting, a constitutional right, we think it's just not sufficient, and it's not fair. And if also in a budget crunch, when we're cutting from children and seniors, we're not required through the state law, through last year's House Bill 1631, to appropriate these funds. If we can do the implementation of voter ID later and appropriate those funds where they're most needed most, especially if we're not going to fund this program sufficiently. So we believe that, of course, we are against voter ID. Of course, we believe that it creates tremendous hurdles for hundreds of thousands of people in the state. And we think that the Republican Party is not being forthright with the funding of trying to inform folks of the law change. Now, it is law, but we want to make sure that if we're going to appropriate, we appropriate it correctly and appropriately, and we just don't believe that's happening currently.
What do you think about communication between the minority party then and the supermajority? I mean, have the ranking Republicans been receptive at all to these concerns, or do you feel that they're kind of shuffled under the rug since Democrats are the superminority party?
When it comes to voter ID, no, they have not been welcome. We have high levels of Republican leadership. We're very much a part of the voter ID law. We've not seen any wiggle room. We've not been able to even debate the amounts. In fact, there's still a debate between the administration, the Secretary of State's office, and the Republican majority on exactly how much it is. When the Secretary of State's office came before the Budget Committee, they were unprepared for exactly how much it costs. We had in our books $4.5 million. They predicted it to be 1.1 or through 1.4. We're not sure. Now we're out. Now the supermajority has said that they're going to put $1.4 million in the budget. We still have not seen a concrete number. We pointed out in Appropriations Committee that we still haven't seen that in writing. So no, we haven't had enough discussion about it. We don't feel like our voice is being heard. And we feel that until that happens, we shouldn't fund something we're not required to fund. We can easily use that money on Medicaid and things we are required to fund per the Constitution. Specifically about Medicaid as well, we're not really being heard as far as making sure senior citizens who are in nursing homes and that and a point change does not keep them from returning to their nursing homes. That is something that we can in good conscience support if we know that if we don't get the correct funding, that folks can lose their home, they can lose their place of residence. But there hasn't been enough debate about that. We don't feel welcome in some of those conversations, and we're going to continue to fight.
How do you think you can get them to listen? I mean, what can you do to reach out? Is there any discussion of that, or?
Well, I would hope that their constituents would speak up to those representatives. Every single one of us has constituents over the age of 65. Every single legislator has nursing homes in their district. I would hope that I would cry to nursing homes that please let your representatives know just the impact that budget cuts will have to the senior citizens in their districts. Some of these folks may be their mothers, their grandmothers, their uncles, their aunts, and we're hoping that we can reach out to those folks and reach out to people in their districts to speak for us.
If we can go on to general questions. Representative Butler, I'm not sure. Are you a lawyer as well?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
Well, we've got two lawyers.
Sounds like I sound like one.
Two attorneys up here, and I know that the new panel that was presented of Supreme Court judge picks has caused some consternation among Republicans, and even some of the ones that I've talked to are maybe thinking about retooling the Missouri plan for judicial selections. I just wanted to know thoughts on that from you two, if that was okay.
Well, look, every member of that panel is more than qualified to do the job. And the bottom line is the purpose of the Missouri plan was not to politicize our judges. It's not to politicize our courts. And this argument that's going on in social media and elsewhere does nothing more than further the idea that our judges should be as political as our legislators. And that makes no sense. It never has made any sense, and it never will make any sense. Indeed, if you look at what's going on in this entire legislative session, all that we're seeing from the majority party is ways to politicize the courts and to deny access to working people. This panel is perfectly fine. They all have good qualifications. Whether or not they were appointed by a Republican or a Democrat, which we saw, the two judges have been appointed by both sides of the aisle and have worked as judges as they should, applying the law instead of applying partisan politics. So I don't understand why someone wants to just continue to stir the pot in that regard.
Representative Beatty.
I think it's important. One, I'm not an attorney, but
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
but I think it's important also to point out that the system that we use is one that has been a model system all around the country. So clearly there are other people that think this is a good system, and we have to keep politics out of our judicial system.
I feel kind of lonely up here.
You know, I want to go back to something that Representative Butler spoke to about the budget, which is, you know, in a nutshell, what we're talking about is a majority party that has no problem whatsoever kicking our seniors out of nursing homes and at the same time denying people the right to vote. So why not let people vote and let our seniors stay in the nursing homes and get the care that they need? It's a ridiculous proposition, in my opinion, and it's amazing to me that this would be tolerated by the Missouri public.